Welcome to the OneTake podcast. This week we're talking about Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal, which just finished its first season a week ago today. For those of you who are new here, the OneTake podcast is where we, from the OneTake channel, talk about anything that doesn't fit into our other podcasts. So if we're not talking about Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, and we're not talking about House of the Dragon, that would be Talking Targaryen, then we're here on the OneTake podcast. I'm Gil, here with my brother Daniel.
Hey, I'm Daniel.
And let's get into it. So what I want to start with is, before we talk about The Rehearsal, let's go back to Nathan For You. And I'm just curious, how much did you watch that show? And as a result of that, how much did you know what to expect going into The Rehearsal?
Yeah, I think I watched most of Nathan For You. Mm-hmm. I think I mostly binged it with like you and Alon.
Yeah.
So I had a pretty good idea of like who Nathan Fielder is. Mm-hmm. And so, but although The Rehearsal I think was generally pretty surprising in a lot of ways, right? So I think I definitely expected, like especially after the first episode, just given his previous format, I expected it to continue in that procedural format of like episode one. So it was a little surprising, right, where he took the rest of the show. Right.
By episode 5, we're not saying, all right, time for this week's rehearsal. It definitely takes a turn. And we'll, of course, talk about all that as we get into the details. And same for me. I watched all of Nathan For You. A lot of that, I think I binged the first couple of seasons. And then in the final season, I was actually watching it week to week. And for me, that show was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. I think his sense of humor is kind of perfectly aligned with ours. Just the sort of deadpan, dry, and very logically taking things just as far as they can go. It's just hilarious. And I think part of what makes Nathan For You funny also is having the mark there, having people involved that aren't in on the insanity, so you sort of see them react to it. So love Nathan For You, was hoping for something similar from The Rehearsal, but still different, and I think that's what we got. So it definitely didn't disappoint. So once you got to the end of The Rehearsal, looking back on it, how would you describe it overall?
So I've been trying to come up with a clear perspective on this show now for like a week, and I still have very mixed feelings.
Yeah.
So part of me really wanted to see that procedural style show and just keep seeing more and more rehearsals. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, like as he sort of escalated things in those first few episodes, I mean, it was hilarious, right? As he shows off like the Fielder method and he gets into the rehearsal of the parenting, like all these things kept upping the stakes and making it funnier and funnier, but it also broke this procedural format and then eventually led to, all sorts of craziness in the final episode, which also it took a turn for, the last episode was not very funny.
Right. And I should say up front, I guess, spoilers for all of season 1. This is meant to be listened to after you watch the season, or if you're somebody that doesn't really care about spoilers and just want to hear us talk about stuff, then you can listen.
Yeah.
But yeah, keep going.
So, yeah, I mean, the last episode was not that funny. I did find it, like, I thought it was fairly emotional, but it's all, like, the show just gives you such a weird feeling. And when I read reviews of it, that's what everybody says. It just makes you feel weird because some of these scenes are emotional, but you know that Nathan, or like you don't really, like you assume Nathan's not actually emotional because his whole character also is he's not emotional, but he's getting emotional about not being emotional at times. Or like there's just so many levels to it. I didn't think about this before, but now I'm just thinking you almost start to feel like one of his marks, right? Like you feel like he's messing with you.
Right.
And it's just like a very weird feeling. So I think overall, I'm happy with what he did because it's such a unique TV experience. Mm-hmm. And look, he could always, season 2, he could just randomly start doing procedural stuff again if he wants to. I think overall, I'm really happy with it.
Yeah.
But it just made me feel weird.
Yeah, I would second a lot of what you just said. I was very mixed on it by the end, but I would say if you asked me 3 episodes in, what do you think about that show, The Rehearsal? My eyes would light up, and I would say, I love the show. You have to watch it. One of the funniest things I've ever seen. And I would say going into the second half, I started to fall out of love with it a little bit. And part of that is because, so like you, I assumed it was going to be procedural. It was set up that way, right? Episode 1 had the complete story of Core, and his entire academic career was fraud. But I was wondering, so much of what was funny in that first episode was the rehearsal itself, the mechanisms of the rehearsal, the fact that he would go to such lengths to recreate the entire bar, including the balloon that was hanging above the door, getting actors to play the people in Core's life. Those things were funny in concept. So if this was a procedural, I wondered, how do you do this again and have it be funny? You mentioned that some of the show was really surprising. And for me, that surprise was a lot of what made the comedy work. One of the funniest moments for me, in the moment where I turned to Alon, I was watching on my phone, and I said, I'm going to stop watching. We need to watch together because this is so funny. But when he is explaining to Core that this entire thing, this whole conversation that they had leading up to this moment was already rehearsed in the past. And then you see he's explaining that to an actor. So he is rehearsing, explaining the concept of the rehearsal. That made me laugh so hard. But that's really only funny once.
Yeah.
And that is what worried me after the first episode. So many of the things that made me laugh, I thought these things are only funny once or twice. And so I kept wondering, how does he keep this going? And he kept finding new ways, but I would say by the skin of his teeth. Because even by the third or fourth episode, you are seeing some of those jokes repeat. And now the funny thing is, to some extent, the jokes wearing off plays into what he was going for, because by the end it all feels a little silly to him, where he starts to question, what am I doing this all for? But to your point, that final episode, I didn't laugh once, and we'll get into whether or not that's a problem. But yeah, I guess the entire time I watched it, I kept wondering, how is he going to keep pushing it? He found ways, but by the end, I think he started to run out of ways, I guess. And that's where I started to feel mixed.
Yeah, I would say, though, that Nathan, he does have a way of making almost any situation funny, right? In the same way that the Nathan For You show, right? Like the whole shtick was he's helping people with their businesses, right? But all the jokes weren't built around that, right? He just created funny situations. So there is a way to make this show procedural and create funny situations, right? And he could still, like, it would still be funny, but I agree with you that the real comedic gold in this show were the jokes about the rehearsal itself.
Right.
Like those were the absolute funniest moments. And so, yeah, it would be disappointing if it were just procedural, because you would never reach like the same level of joke as like the first time he reveals that he rehearsed that conversation with Core.
Right. Now, to your point, it wasn't not all the laughs came from the concept of the rehearsal itself. Looking back at that first episode, part of it just came from Core, too.
Yeah.
And what was nice about his character is he's not the kind of person where I felt like I was laughing entirely at him. It was more like he had some funny quirks. Like the line we already brought up, but my entire academic history is a fraud. And it's like, why are you choosing that way to phrase it?
Yeah, but you do also actually feel some sympathy for him.
Yeah.
Like he is fairly likable, I thought, even though he has these quirks that we can laugh at.
Right. But yeah, so some of the humor does just come from he's an interesting character.
Yeah.
And that's also true to some extent in episode 3, the gold digger, that guy was, and maybe there's a little bit more of an element of laughing at than there was with Core. But so some of the humor comes from the participants in the rehearsal. And by the end of the series, that also starts to go away a little bit. As the show starts to focus more and more on Nathan himself, you start to lose the mark. You start to lose somebody who's not in on the insanity. And then you go to episode 2, and I think there is still some of that element of there is somebody in the rehearsal who themselves is a source of humor, like the Robin character.
Yeah.
His obsession with numbers, the fact that he has to bring up his Scion every 2 minutes.
Yeah, he crashed his Scion going 100 miles per hour, whatever. The line was.
And the crazy thing is, it was 2 minutes before 5 o'clock, and then there were still elements of the rehearsal that you laugh at. The idea of the child actor having to change every 4 hours, the robot that mimics a real sleeping baby, and the night owl he hired to push the right buttons based off of how the real baby cries.
Wait, and the qualifications for the guy he hired, he told me he was a night owl.
Yeah.
It turned out he wasn't.
Now, there was a turn. So I think the turn of the show starts to happen at the end of episode 2, because that's when you realize the whole Angela story, with the child, that wasn't going away after one episode. But not only that, Nathan is entering the rehearsal himself. And I guess, what did you think of that turn? Because that's probably the moment where you realize, oh, this is not going to be a new rehearsal every episode.
Again, like mixed feelings, right? I was partly disappointed because I was excited to see new situations, but I was also excited because, like, you know, just as Nathan creates more and more deep levels of rehearsal in this show, like, it's hilarious. And I was excited to see him take on the role of father. Like, that was pretty funny.
Yeah, so I guess same for me. I was a little bit disappointed because I felt like I don't know how much more I want to see of the whole Angela storyline. And then they did it in this episode. Episode 3 does show you how it still has the procedural element because you bring in the gold digger storyline, which I love the ending to that. Just the guy disappears. I never heard from him again. But by the end of episode 3, I was like, okay, how do you possibly keep this going? And then he found a way with episode 4. That's when he did the Fielder method. And this is where it starts to become more about Nathan himself, but it's still funny because of just how absurd it is. The fact that he would repeat the class over and over as a student and almost do this whole Groundhog Day thing. But yeah, the interesting change here is that there really is there's no Mark anymore at that point. Like, yes, everybody in that room is an actor and probably recognizes this is a little bit crazy. Yeah. But when it's just Nathan and has a bunch of people playing other students and someone playing Nathan himself, that's funny because the concept is funny.
Yeah, and the whole thing then becomes a production, right? Yeah. And that's where you start wondering, like, is this entire thing scripted? Right? Like, the only Mark at that point is Angela. And Angela's also now been in so many of these episodes, right? And experiencing so much of this, you start to also wonder, like, is she somewhat in on this? Like, the other thing, too, is the end of episode 3, I think, is the last episode where we also have a, like, nice resolution to the procedural format, right? In that the character, I forget his name, the gold digger guy.
The one with the gold digger girlfriend.
Yeah. So she's not a gold digger. So, you know, he clearly has this, like, deeply emotional experience talking with the actor. And then it was actually kind of touching, I thought, that he just disappears because he kind of gives up on this whole rehearsal thing. He gives up on getting the money from that actor's fake father or grandfather. And so I actually thought that was kind of touching. It seems like Nathan, the situation Nathan crafted actually got through to this guy.
Sometimes the rehearsal itself is enough.
Yeah. And so, like, it was like sort of disappointing that we don't get that again. Right. And that's the other element to the last 3 episodes is they're kind of unsatisfying because we just don't really know what's going on.
Yeah. And it does start to fill in that, like you said at the beginning of this, it made you feel weird. And I would say episode 4 is especially where I started to get that because when I'm watching Nathan pretending to be a student, all the other students are actors. The person playing Nathan is an actor. I'm just watching a guy surrounded by, and it's still funny, but you do start to ask yourself, what am I watching here?
But, you know, during that episode, though, you know, looking back on it now, I kind of feel like it's all, like, they're all actors. But when I was in that episode, even though the actor Nathan was pretending to be was an actor, I didn't think of him as an actor in that moment. Right? He did seem like a real character with a real life that Nathan was just, like, you know, messing with.
Yeah, well, and I think part of what your enjoyment of the final stretch of episodes, I think, will hinge on one important thing, which is when you look at Nathan, do you say this is a guy faking everything? Or do you say this person's being genuine? Because a lot of the last couple of episodes, it's him on his own. And do you buy it? And for me, I think the reality is that Nathan is playing an exaggerated version of himself. And in episode 4, when he's doing the Groundhog Day of the class over and over, I went with it. I bought it. You know, it's like when you watch any show, you're watching characters, but you're not constantly thinking to yourself, I'm watching actors playing characters. And I would say in episode 4, I was in the mode of just watching Nathan. I wasn't thinking about the fact that he's putting on an act. But that little it started to come up in my brain a little bit, that tickle in the back of my brain of something feels off about this. And I would say by episode 5, the novelty for me pretty much was worn off. And the issue of him playing a character and me no longer buying it, that started to take the forefront. Because episode 5 is when the whole religion aspect comes in, which I so did not expect. But this is where he's trying to raise the child Jewish and not let Angela find out about it. And it was funny, but almost funny in the sense of a sitcom plot line.
Yeah.
But this is no longer real, right? Nathan is not actually trying to do this. And there is some humor in Angela reacting to it, but that doesn't even go very far because this is the episode where she decides, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. And then that, I don't know if you have anything to say about that episode in particular, but...
Not that episode in particular, but generally this issue of like buying into whether Nathan is being Nathan or like a character. Like he's clearly playing an exaggerated version of himself. But I do believe there's some amount of honesty there, right? Like I do believe that, I mean, just from seeing Nathan For You and all these shows, right? Like this has got to be somewhat what he's like to some extent, or at least this is his sense of humor, and he generally is pretty dry. And maybe it's just because I feel I connect with him in a lot of ways. Like I think his sense of humor is very similar to ours. In the same way, like a lot of people have thought I was an asshole at different times just because my sense of humor is similar to Nathan's.
Right.
So I just like connect with him a lot. But yeah, you kind of lose it in those last couple episodes. And I wonder if there's a way he could have made it feel a little more genuine. Like it's funny, even in episode 1, when he's trying to build a connection with Core so that Core will share more details about Trisha, right? Because at first he's unwilling to share details about her, even though she's the one he's going to confess to.
Right.
So they go to that swimming pool and they start divulging personal information. But as soon as Nathan's about to divulge more information about his divorce, he has an old man get into the swimming pool to stop the moment, basically.
Right.
And it's just funny what if maybe at one point in the show, Nathan did actually share some personal information and made it feel just a little bit more real.
Yeah, and that was such a funny moment. And that is where I could see the procedural format working. Because if he has to constantly come up with new ways to socially engineer somebody into opening up or just figuring out how to get these situations to play out the way you want them to play out, that's funny. And that could be funny many times. And at a certain point, it's no longer, you no longer laugh at the fact that he recreates the location every time and does those things. But so much of it is driven by the particular situation and people you're dealing with. So I could see that being funny. But he didn't go that way. Instead, it became more focused on himself. And I am curious how that struck other people. I haven't actually read reviews of this, so I'm not sure what other people's experience was, but I watched the finale with my girlfriend, and she actually found it very moving. And when I pointed out, I'm like, well, he's just playing a role, like it's not real. She made the point that, that's true of any story you watch. But I guess for me, I'm so used to watching Nathan and feeling like he's manipulating the situation to be funny and to get a reaction out of the real people who aren't in on the joke. I can't look at Nathan and by the end of the series, I guess, I can no longer look at him and forget that I'm seeing a real person and just feel like I'm watching a character in a story.
Yeah, and the issue is, right, like why do we care about the characters in a story like in Better Call Saul? It's because they feel real and we're being constantly sold the fact that they are real, right? Like there's this whole world they construct where these characters are real. Whereas this show, it's a reality show. So you're hit on the head with the fact that it's real. It's not made up. Like it's our world. Mm-hmm. I'm getting lost in Nathan's craziness of trying to explain how this works, right? But the fact that it's like a reality show means it actually needs to be real. Like it needs to be real. But then once you start feeling it's not real, that breaks everything.
Right. And I think that didn't happen to me in the first 5 episodes. There were diminishing returns where it started to come up. And I would say if you just look at laughs per minute, it decreased each episode. It's the finale is where I started to feel very mixed. And I kind of look at the finale as having 2 halves. The first half is dealing with the child of Remy, I think, right? Who started to call Nathan dad and didn't want to call him Nathan. I don't want you to be Nathan.
It was, I don't want you to be Ethan.
Yeah, that's right. And that was a little bit funny at first, and then it was moving.
Yeah.
Because I genuinely felt bad for that kid. At the same time, I also felt kind of angry, to be honest, because that felt like such a predictable result. This child who doesn't have a father, you're going to put him in a room with somebody a few hours a day and basically say, call him dad. Like, pretend he's your dad. And that kid...
It's really messed up.
It's messed up, yeah. And I don't want to... I don't want to try and adjudicate whose fault that is. Like, even if you look at the kid's mother, like, who knows? Like, I'll say, number one, I don't think that kid's scarred or anything. I think he's going to be fine. And if they got paid for this and he got to have a fun experience, like, net, this might be a positive.
Yeah. And it was only like a week, right? I think it was like a week, like 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So it's not... Yeah, I'm sure that could have had an impact on him, but it's not like they did it for like a month.
Right. So I'm not worried about the kid. Net, I think the family probably came out ahead. This was a good thing overall. But just my honest experience of the show was I felt bad for the kid. And if I'm feeling bad for him, then I'm feeling mad at whoever's making him.
Yeah. So then do you think that was real? Because that's really like that's really interesting. Right? Was that a real scenario that just came up, or was it something Nathan like fabricated? And then if Nathan fabricated it, was it real for the kid, or was it acting? Right? Because if Nathan fabricated this situation, like he knew, oh, this is great. There's a kid who doesn't have a dad. Wow, that sounds messed up.
Yeah.
But he says, hey, this is convenient. This kid doesn't have a dad. Let's have me play his dad and let's see, the emotional impact. Or was that kid, also acting?
I mean, this show does a great job of giving the impression that Nathan started with a premise. Like, it seems like he went in saying, I'm going to do a new rehearsal every week. And then he kind of just went with wherever it took him.
Yeah.
That's the feeling they give. And
I want to believe that. I really want to believe that.
I do believe that. I mean, it is possible that a lot more of this is scripted than we realize.
Yeah.
And I think that's generally what you should assume with reality TV, is that this is a lot more fake than you think. But they at least did a good job of selling me on the idea that none of this was expected. That when Nathan decided to enter the rehearsal himself, that was not the intentional result. That he actually realized during the production, and maybe the thought wasn't, I'm going to enter because I want to learn about fatherhood. The thought may have been, this will be good and funny for the show. But I still think it was an organic result. It was not planned. At least that's the way it struck me.
And so if it is organic, I also wonder how much of him sort of reflecting on the ethics of the show is real, right? Because I wonder, did this Remy thing happen unexpectedly? Or maybe it did happen as planned, but I wonder if it did have a real impact on him. Like, did he look at it and think, oh shoot, is this messed up? Because multiple times in the show, right, he reflects on, is this wrong what I'm doing to people? Mm-hmm. Right. And it's funny because a lot of reality shows really mess with people, but typically it's, consenting adults rather than children. Right. Like, I wonder, is he actually going through the experience of, and he's been doing this for years, right? The way he manipulates people on camera. Mm-hmm. Like, I wonder if he's actually going through some sort of experience of, is this wrong or not? And I guess I did have that in the back of my mind. So he did sell it enough that I felt it was genuine, that he was going through some sort of real, ethical dilemma.
And that's where you get into the second half of the episode, where it's him trying to, I don't know, how would you describe it? He's trying to see where he went wrong and see if he bears some responsibility in what happened with Remy. So he starts to do the Groundhog Day thing again, where he's going back in time. Now he does it as the mother. And like, I guess at that point, that's where the joke started to feel stale to me. Like, I've seen this already. He looks in the mirror and he sees a girl version of himself. He tries to replay the situation with the child by having, a 20-year-old play him, by having nobody play him, by having a doll play him. And I didn't laugh. I think because that's where it started to break the quote-unquote reality of there's an exaggerated version of Nathan that we're watching. And even this felt like a bridge too far. I didn't buy that the exaggerated version of Nathan would think that you could have a 15-year-old play Remy and it be at all cathartic.
15? I think the guy was like 30.
Yeah, I kind of just started to roll my eyes. I just didn't buy it. So I wasn't really laughing.
Oh, wait, sorry. You're talking about the kid playing Remy. I thought you were saying when he tried with like an adult child. When he tried, oh man, I'm getting lost in the layers of this. He was trying to figure out how can I raise a kid like in the rehearsal without it being real, without it feeling real to the child. And he used like an adult to play the child.
Right. That was an earlier episode, right? Yeah. So here when he has that older kid, the one who had the overdose.
Yes.
Play Remy.
No. But this was a different kid too than the overdose kid. This is the kid who took over on like the 13th birthday or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So I was just regrounding and saying that the scene I'm talking about is when he has the adult kind of like coming at him to hug him. And I just, at that point, I felt like we'd seen these jokes before and the novelty wasn't there anymore. And like I said, I just didn't buy that he would think, okay, let me try and replay the scene with no child. I'll just mime everything. I mean, I don't know. I don't believe he would do that.
I will say though that the joke of him rehearsing things still landed for me when when he's having the emotional conversation with Remy's real mom, with Remy there, and they're talking about like, do you think Remy's going to be okay and all this stuff, and it's like pretty intense. And then at the end of the conversation, Nathan looks at her and says, "Where'd you get that sweater from?" And then that's the moment where okay, now he's going to rehearse this. And I still thought that was hysterical. Yeah.
That was funny. I'll give you that. Did you feel anything else, though, in the second half of the episode? Maybe there were a couple of laughs, depending on the mileage you get out of some of this humor. But did you feel moved by Nathan's whole journey here of trying to see where he went wrong and dealing with his regret?
I think I felt moved by Remy.
Same.
I don't know that I felt moved by Nathan.
Yeah.
Right, because the whole time I'm just kind of struggling with, do I think Nathan's like, a monster? Or do I think he's playing character or like what? Yeah, it was so hard to actually buy into his...
And am I correct in thinking they wanted us to buy into it emotionally, right? Because there aren't that many attempts at humor in the second half of that episode. There definitely are, right? Him looking in the mirror, replaying the scene with the child over and over. But for most of the time, it's the same quote-unquote joke over and over. It's just him reliving that whole experience. So I don't think that they're expecting us, or Nathan's expecting us, to be just gut-busting laughter for 10 minutes. I thought that he actually wanted us to buy into his character.
Well, here's what I keep wondering is like, what was the point of this show overall, right? At the beginning, clearly he was trying to get a lot of laughs. Like, it was hilarious. But as a show as a whole, was the point to get us to buy into his emotional journey at the end? Or was he trying to make like a more meta point with the show? Like, that's the thing I'm wondering is he trying to make a point to us about TV?
Right.
Like, is there a higher level he's shooting for here?
Yeah, it's sometimes as I'm talking, I hear the comments that I know I'm going to get. So in this example, you weren't supposed to laugh, or you're missing the point. So I guess, am I missing the point? I was wondering that in the last episode. I just thought to myself, am I missing something? Like, is there some commentary about our inability to rehearse for every moment? You have to go with the spontaneity of life, and you can't practice for certain things like fatherhood until you actually experience it. Like, you see Nathan learn that with the Gold Digger episode. There are emotions that you can't be ready for. And when Core was in the moment, he started to freeze up, because it's just nothing replaces the real thing. But I guess I knew that already. And so I don't know, to me it felt like it was a really funny idea.
So I was really trying to figure out like, what is Nathan trying to tell us with this show? Mm-hmm. So I went through like all of his ending narrations.
Okay.
And I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the message here? Right. So with episode 1, his ending narration is about how, when they were practicing, he had Core rehearse like the night after the confession to see basically how it would feel. And then he ends that narration with, maybe it's easiest to choose a path when you can live the future first, to free yourself from doubt and regret, to always know the answers. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I get much out of that, right? But he has the confession to Core also. And that's the first hint that, okay, Nathan's sort of reflecting on, am I creating like a messed up scenario for people?
Right.
Where, he kind of tricked Core into cheating. And then the Willy Wonka music plays at the end. And has he created this like fantasy land and like kids are going to die in it?
Oh, right? I do have to say, by the way, him secretly teaching Core all the answers to trivia, that might have been the funniest part of the whole series for me.
Yeah.
That was so just clever, so good.
The police officer explains a hostage situation going on, and he goes, "It's days like this I curse the Chinese ever invented gunpowder." Okay, and then episode 2. So then, there wasn't really much of an ending narration to episode 2, or there was one earlier. Okay, this is him. What was this about? Sometimes I'm not sure why I make the choices I do. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, he said a bunch of stuff. I didn't find it very interesting.
Okay.
So I didn't write it down.
And now you're reminding me, just as you're going down memory lane, episode 2, when he decides to enter the rehearsal, one thing I remember finding really funny is just how dramatic the music is.
Yeah.
As if this is this very significant turning point and decision for the character.
Do you mind them going through all these?
No, this is great.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going.
So then episode 3. Okay, this one's interesting. And then every now and then there are these glimmers, these moments where you forget. You just feel like a family. That's when you know the rehearsal is working. I often feel envious of others, the way they can immerse themselves in a world with so little effort, the way they can just believe.
And you see Angela picking groceries out of the dirt.
To gather only what they need to know and ignore the rest. This is also cut with Angela talking about Halloween being a satanic ritual.
Right.
Emotions are a funny thing. They're not easy to engineer. After all, there's only so much you can do to deceive yourself. And even when you think of everything, there will always be things you forget. And you see the label on one of the apples or one of the fruits.
Yeah, that was picked from the garden.
So, like, this is him talking about how... Okay, now I'm going to try to look at it from a different perspective, actually, right? He's talking about himself, but maybe in a way he's also talking about the audience, right? How do you engineer emotions in the audience?
Right.
I don't know, is there something to that?
We kind of lie to ourselves, and when you're really into a story, you ignore the flaws. Right? When you like something, people will point out criticisms and you kind of wave them off because they don't penetrate. So
Yeah.
either in or you're out.
And you need, like, to buy into to feel an emotional impact from a show, you do need to deceive yourself, right? Like, you do need to believe it's real.
Right, and you're lying to yourself in so many ways. Like every time the camera cuts to another angle, like that doesn't happen in the real world. And there's so many things about a story that obviously aren't real, but you still connect with it.
Yeah.
But I knew that already.
All right, well, let's see. Does he say anything new about it?
Yeah.
Episode 4. So remember, this ends, right, with the overdose scene. Mm-hmm. So he goes, "It's easy to assume that others think the worst of you. But when you assume what others think, maybe you're turning them into a character that only exists in your mind. The nice thing is sometimes all it takes is a change in perspective to make the world feel brand new." And that's when, like, the overdose kid turns into a child again.
Which was funny, the way there are two funny parts I remember during that whole sequence. When he goes down the slide and comes out a child, and then also when he's getting taken away on the stretcher, and you recognize one of the guys from his class.
Yeah, it's the actor that Nathan's been pretending to be.
Right, right.
So this is it. Like, I did think this narration was interesting for what we were just talking about. When you assume what others think, maybe you're turning them into a character that only exists in your mind.
So that resonates.
Nathan.
Wait, Nathan. Okay, what are you saying?
Sorry, that resonates on a deeper level of just, like, assuming in our own lives what people think of us and, creating these characters. But also Nathan. Like, who are we making Nathan out to be in our own heads? Mm-hmm. Something to that.
Yeah. There's definitely something to that.
Anything else on that one?
I don't know. I guess you're saying, okay, I'm saying there's
Yeah.
something, that's kind of like a smiling, nodding kind of thing. You're saying that we're making assumptions about Nathan and who he really is when we don't really know.
Yeah. But what's weird is to, like, enjoy the show, we do need to make those assumptions about him, right? Like, we kind of need to assume that the things he's saying are meant to be taken at face value, right? We need to believe he's truthful, basically, to enjoy the show. Or,
I don't know.
Not really.
To me, that became more true in the second half of the season. In the first half, I saw him as like the ringmaster. I didn't necessarily care if what he was saying was true or not. To watch other people take the journey of going into his insanity, to me, that was a lot of the humor. How is Core going to react to learning that there's a replica of his apartment somewhere where Nathan's been practicing? And then I guess, we already said it earlier, but that on the face of it is just a funny idea. You don't even need Core to be there. But if you told me somebody recreated an entire bar and replicated it, I would laugh at that. But yeah, I guess to me, the second half of the season is when you really need to buy into Nathan as a character, because it starts to be more about him specifically.
Yeah, I mean, even episode 4, which is where that narration concluded the episode, right? Episode 4 with the overdose and stuff was already kind of more about Nathan. Right? Like the whole Fielder method scenario was way more about him than the previous episodes.
Right, which was episode 4. So yeah, second half of the season.
Oh yeah, good point.
Yeah. What did you think, by the way? We talked about it a little bit off mic, but the whole overdose scenario, did any part of you think, is he going too far with this?
I think it was one of those things that makes you start to view Nathan in a more negative light and start to see him as way more of a performer, right? Because he's it's clearly played for laughs.
Yeah.
And it's like a little messed up, especially when like Angela, we don't know the extent of Angela's personal experience, right? But Angela did deal with a lot of issues with alcohol and drugs, like as a teenager. And so like pretty messed up that he's like recreating those scenarios for her.
Right. And he's trying to get something out of her.
And she looks emotional, by the way. When she gets there, like she actually looks emotional seeing this, production of an overdose.
Yeah. So I guess I don't really have much to add other than I agree with that. It does make you question it. I'm sure, well, from looking online, I know there were some people who watched it who have dealt with similar situations in the real world, and they were bothered by it. Personally, it wasn't until afterward I looked back and I started to wonder, I don't know, is that cool? In the moment I was scratching my head. That was, I'll say, the first time I was watching the show where I wondered, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But this isn't funny to me. And then it became funny because he went down the slide and because you saw, the first time I laughed is when he gets on the stretcher and it's the guy from class. That made me laugh. But up until then, when the actual scene was playing out and Angela runs in, doesn't know what's going on, I was wondering, what's the idea here? And watching Nathan act and pretend to be like, oh my God, what's happening? Are you okay? I guess I was confused. I didn't know what I was watching. And then we got to the couple punchlines and he decided to roll the whole rehearsal back, and that was funny. And then, in retrospect, I wondered, I just don't know that we needed that. And that's where I start to wonder, is there some broader point that I'm missing? I don't know.
So, one interesting, like that whole setup, right? Why did he have the kid go through, this like drug addiction experience and everything, right? He did it to punish himself, is at least how it's set up, right? He feels like guilty for what he's generally doing with the rehearsal, right? Like some of the Fielder method stuff makes him think, oh, am I using bad techniques? Am I stalking people? Am I lying to people? Right? So he kind of feels guilty about that. And then he comes home and he kind of wants to be punished, right? It feels wrong to him that he gets this nice welcoming from his like fake child.
Right. Is that how you would greet your father if you hadn't seen him? And
so he like wants to punish himself. So the overdose scene is sort of him trying to like maximize the stakes of punishing himself. But again, it's like, do I really believe this is like Nathan going through a dark experience wanting to punish himself? No, it more feels like he's constructing this situation for laughs. And like it feels like a little messed up when you get to that scene.
Though I guess I go back and forth on it because, like we both said, we had mixed feelings by the end of the season. But there is an exaggerated version of the real life Nathan that is a character who at times I buy into. Right? That was part of what I said I didn't like about the finale, is that there were parts where I didn't buy into it. And I didn't buy that he would try to relive the day miming with no kid actually there. So I guess at times it did work for me, but by the end it didn't.
Episode 5, Apocalypto. So this ends with him basically, with Angela leaving, right? It was time to stand up for my own values and the values of those who came before me. He's putting up a mezuzah on the doorway. We don't always get to choose what happens in life, but we do get to decide if we rehearse for it.
Okay.
And then he's asked to support Israel openly on his platform, but refuses to answer.
Yeah. Alon, do you want to come over here for 1 second and just give your verdict on the rehearsal. That mic's not on. So you talking to Daniels?
So overall, I did really like it. I felt it started out a lot stronger than it ended. Last episode, I felt kind of plummeted a bit in quality because at first it started out kind of like 50% comedy, 50% social experiment, and then it gradually the comedy part kind of dwindled for me. It became maybe like 80% social experiment, 20% comedy, which was still entertaining. But then the last episode was kind of neither, because it just kind of became this fiction about himself.
Yeah, if it's just Nathan, there's no social experiment.
Exactly. Like he's trying to make us believe that he's trying to believe that this is all real when there's no way he's going to convince himself of that. So it was a little awkward to me. But I gotta get to a meeting now.
All right.
But
thanks, Lon.
Yeah, I'll join the next one.
Sounds good. That was my brother, Alon. You know. All right. So well, I guess any more on the narration from the end of episode 5?
Mm-mm.
You know, and one thing I'll say about 5 is similar to 6, right? Where it is focused on Nathan.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the same mixed feelings. And I think part of that is because some of the humor, like we pointed out, comes from the zany characters that he gets involved. And there was some comedy from that woman trying to get him to take a stance.
Yeah.
Because then there is some realism there. Because you know Nathan does not want to come down on either side of this debate. And that was really funny. Yeah. So this is the final narration now?
I didn't write down anything. Was there? There was no final narration. It was just his speech to the kid.
Oh, where he's like, "You mean dad?" And he's
Yeah.
like, "No, don't you mean like I'm your dad?"
Yeah, and he goes, "I thought you were mommy," and then he goes, "No, I'm daddy." And then the idea is he's slipping into like a real speech there rather than like what was rehearsed.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. Did we get anything out of what Nathan is trying to tell us with this show? I do think he's like, there's definitely an element of him just trying to mess with us and just like break our brains on like how TV works.
Right. When I was saying I always hear the commenters in my head, when Alon was saying there's no social experiment by the end, in my head what I was hearing is we're the social experiment.
So then what does he do in season 2?
Well, let me say one thing though.
Yeah.
For an experiment, it doesn't work on everybody. You know, some people maybe were moved and bought into the character. And then other more intellectual types who can see through the facade. Well, I'll say this. I don't feel automatically excited for season 2. I'm very glad it's getting a season 2. And if you put a button in front of me and it said, push this button to get the show renewed, I would definitely push the button. I would pay money to get a season 2. But I can't say I'm that excited for it because I would say at the end of just about every episode this season, I found myself wondering, how is he going to keep this going? And he kept finding a way. And I thought, wow, I can't believe he did it again. And by the end, I kept asking myself that question, how's he going to keep it going? And each time, I wasn't quite as satisfied with the answer. So by the end of season 1, I'm asking that question again. And where previously I was trained to expect a great answer, now I'm not sure. So I am very curious to see what he does in season 2. Is he once again going to try the rinse and repeat format and then it slowly transforms into something else? I don't know. Is there anywhere you want to see it go?
So I think there's sort of 2 different perspectives I have on what I want to see in season 2. There's like the thematic angle versus what I think is going to be amusing. Mm-hmm. Like thematically, I do kind of want to better understand like what is Nathan trying to tell us? And I still, you know, as we're talking about it, I'm just getting so confused, right? With like all the different, and I don't know, like, is there a message? Like, is he trying to tell us something unique and interesting about like TV or media more generally? Like, there's something to that, right? Because he's blurring these lines of real and fake, and he's, you know, mocking reality TV in a way, but also mocking real TV. Like, I don't know, there's something to that. And I kind of just want to understand it better.
And I think on that, just before, don't forget, are you going to forget your other point?
No, go for it.
Okay. I'm not sure he necessarily has a message or has a particular theme in mind. I think it's more, these are ideas that interest him. And if there is some deeper meaning, I think he's hoping it'll come out just incidentally or accidentally. I saw an interview with Vince Gilligan about Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and he was getting asked questions like this. What does it mean that this character died or that this happened to that character? And he was saying, we leave that to the viewers. And honestly, we don't really think about it that much. We just say, what would these characters organically do? Where do we want to see the story go? Things like that. What feels right? And then the meaning comes out of that. I imagine Nathan, again, he gives the impression that he is following this thing wherever it'll take him. He's making choices in the moment. And I'm willing to bet that he doesn't have a particular message or idea he's trying to portray. He's exploring ideas. Whatever comes out of that, comes out of that. And maybe in season 2, he's no longer in a situation where he can just follow it organically. The season came to an end. He's going to have to start over. So maybe he will pick some new ideas or different angles to look at it and then see where it takes him.
So that is like a meta perspective in which everything Nathan does is genuine in the sense that like an artist creates something. Every choice they made. And that it tells you more about Nathan than necessarily about the message he's trying to tell us. Like, why did Nathan create this show? Or like that's an interesting perspective of just trying to understand him better. And yeah, I mean, I feel like we do see a lot of the real like Nathan coming through in the fact that he chose to make this show.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. The other angle is like, what do I just think will be like amusing to see? I have no idea, right? Like he could try to up the stakes more, right? Which is, I don't know, is he going to rehearse his own TV show? Like, is he going to, is he going to have to like make a rehearsal of an even grander scale?
Season 2 is a rehearsal for season 2. I would like to see some returning characters. I want to check in on Core, see how he's doing. They did that on Nathan For You sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, I remember like there was a detective. I forget exactly the role he played, but I know they came back to him a couple of times. And the grandfather from The Gold Digger, I mean, he was an actor playing a role, so he could easily come back to play another grandpa.
And do you, just one of the ideas I had for him escalating things, do you think there's a chance he's going to create an entirely fake town? Like a massive production
That's
of
where
some
my
type?
head went. As soon as you said up the stakes, just something completely crazy. Yeah, a whole fake town, and then some people come in who don't know it's a fake town, but everyone they talk to is an actor. You can imagine ways that you could make this funny by bringing some of the novelty back.
So this is a bad idea. This is not a good idea. But imagine if all of season 2 were a rehearsal, and so Nathan's not even in it. It's the actor who plays Nathan.
That would be pretty funny. I don't know, but the fun thing is we have no idea where it's going to go. But it sounds like the only thing that would disappoint us is more of the same.
Yeah. Although I don't even know how you could do more of the same.
Yeah, well, I guess more of the same would be Core comes back in the first episode, and then Angela in the second. Just literally repeats. Daniel, was it exploitative?
All TV is exploitative.
Exactly. Do you have any Daniel's bits?
Yeah, is it time for Daniel's bits?
Yeah.
I actually have a lot of Daniel's bits for this segment.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
And for those of you that are new here, Daniel's bits needs no introduction.
All right, the first of Daniel's bits, there's actually a long list here. All right. So, do you know how Core got onto the TV show?
Craigslist ad?
Do you know what the Craigslist posting said?
I forget. I remember it being very brief.
Yeah, TV opportunity. Is there something you're avoiding? To that, Core responded with a video just spilling his guts out about his lie to all of his friends.
Did we see that video?
We saw portions of it, yeah.
You know, I saw on Reddit, somebody posted Core on Cash Cab. And there's a whole thing going on Reddit where people are trying to find these characters in real life, which I think is okay. The only part where it gets a little creepy is people finding like Remy's Facebook and stuff like that. But yeah, there was a video of Core on Cash Cab, and apparently he whiffed just about every question.
They weren't in his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing I did was I compiled Core's versions of confessing, so you didn't have to.
Oh, great. Thank you.
They're all pretty similar, but his first attempt at confessing, or at least first on screen, he just randomly blurts out in the middle of a conversation, "My entire educational history is a front."
He said front?
Yeah. That time he said front. Okay, the next one. My whole educational status has been a scam. And then his real confession is my whole educational life has been kind of a fraud.
I felt so bad for him when he was actually making the confession. Well, first off, the actress who played his friend, spot on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they edited it to find like just the moments that best matched, but it was spot on.
It was really impressive.
But when Core was so nervous that he became fixated on when the pizza would be ready, and he just kept turning away and looking, so awkward.
I really felt that. Like, I really felt that moment. Like, I felt the suspense, and I like just really bought into Core and like his anxiety about this situation.
Classic underdog tale.
Yeah. Okay, one of Angela's dates, she asks him, what scares you most in life? First off, it's eels.
Yeah. But I have to say, first off, and it took a build-up. You're waiting for what he's going to say. Eels.
Sorry, I screwed up the timing there. We'll do it again. What scares you most in life?
Well, I'd have to say, first off, eels.
Okay, this was a really interesting line. Before Angela's third date with Robin, we see her praying to God.
Oh, this was weird.
This was really weird.
Yeah.
I just pray, Father, you would place your hand heavy upon this production, Lord, heavy upon Nathan.
Pause. At that point, that felt very dark to me.
Yeah.
I thought she was cursing him or something.
Yeah.
And then you realize what she's really saying.
That even if they think they are choreographing or guiding this process, that they will see it is not them, it is God. You are the one that holds the world together on its axis, Father. That was intense.
Yeah. Which, so like I said, the first half of it definitely feels creepy, especially because she's whispering and it's like they caught her in the act. And then the second half, I hear it and I say, okay, I'm not a religious person, but I could understand. No, I guess I can't really. I don't know. Like, is she worried that, like, isn't.
So here's what I was trying to figure out. Is she just praying for, she's going on this third date. She's hoping to find a man that she can actually raise a child with. Is this her praying just like, I hope this goes well, right? Like, I hope this is set up in a way that actually furthers my life instead of it being played for laughs? Or is this also her, and maybe it's both, like, does she actually worry that Nathan is trying to play God?
Yeah, but that would be, it's like you're just living in a house with fake vegetables.
But she lived there for a while, right?
Yeah,
like, I think
true.
she was there for a while. It's like, it's got to feel pretty weird. Like, these guys are kind of like playing God, right? Like the production.
Right. To a very small scale.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not sure where she was coming from.
But it was intense. Like, I just saw that scene and I was like, whoa, I rewatched it and I just missed that scene the first time.
Yeah. When they definitely play it to be intense.
Yeah.
It feels like, whoa, what's happening here? It also feels a little bit like an invasion of her privacy, but she chose to live there and she knows she's being watched 24/7. By the way, how about all the scenes of her just dancing all the time?
Yeah. Oh, that was my last Daniel's bits. I was going to leave it out because it was a little dark, but what was she doing during the overdose scene?
Dancing?
Yeah. She gets interrupted from her dancing.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant like she walked in, she saw the kid and just started dancing.
Gil, who would find that funny?
Yeah, I know, ridiculous. That was all your Daniel's bits?
Yeah, we're done with Daniel's
It
bits.
sounds like you gave up partway through because all those bits were from the first episode.
No. Were they?
I mean, first and second.
Huh.
This is the worst Daniel's bits section yet.
There were some good bits there, though, right?
There's some
I
solid
thought
bits.
it was nice that I compiled his versions of Confessing. There were only 3 of them.
Yeah, and plus you also got the narration from every episode.
Yeah.
It technically wasn't part of Daniel's
Well,
bits.
I
but-
missed it for one episode.
Any other thoughts, Daniel, on the rehearsal? If somebody hadn't seen it and they asked, should I watch it?
Yes. No, I definitely think you should watch it. I think the first half, most of the show is funny enough that it's just super entertaining. And I do think it's like a head scratcher. Like, I think it really makes you think. I don't know that you end up anywhere with your thinking, so I feel like a little dissatisfied and frustrated. Like, I kind of wish I was able to say something like more insightful about the theme of this show, but like, I just can't figure it out. Like, it just like, I don't know. There's something to it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's all it is. Is it supposed to just sort of break our brains?
And you were about to say something else before I prompted you with the would you recommend this show?
No, I was going to basically say that I'm like a little frustrated with myself. Like I'd like to come up with some deeper understanding of this show. And I don't know if that's my failing or if it's just not there or I don't know what.
Well, I was trying to think of a way to be, I stopped myself. I felt bad.
Good thing is that this is the rehearsal for the real podcast.
Right.
We're making about the rehearsal.
I really wanted to come up with some way to do that reveal. Like I'm talking to Daniel, and then it'll be like Adam with a wig on or something. But couldn't figure out a way logistically to make it work. Yeah, I don't think I really have anything else to add. Like I said, I loved the show at the beginning. By the end, I had mixed feelings. I still love Nathan Fielder. I think he's a genius. I think he's hilarious. And I don't know. I mean, I'm very curious to see where they go with season 2. It's really hard to imagine what he'll do, but I'm glad he's getting a chance. With that, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more. If you're watching and you'd rather be listening, you can find the OneTake podcast on any podcast app. You can also see a link in the description. And the idea with the OneTake podcast, because it's kind of been on and off that we've been doing it, because OneTake is sort of a family of podcasts at this point. Saulcast, where we used to talk about Better Call Saul, but going forward, it'll house our Breaking Bad rewatch. There's Talkin' Targaryen, or as some people call it, Talkin' Targs. And that's where we talk about the new Game of Thrones spinoff or prequel, House of the Dragon. The OneTake podcast houses everything else. So this week we talked about the rehearsal, and going forward, it'll be movies, it'll be video games, other shows, and even other stuff on top of that. So stick around. With that, I'm Gil.
I'm Daniel.
And this is the OneTake Podcast.